My husband's mistress went into labor, and the hospital called me because he had the audacity to list me as the emergency contact. My phone rang at 2:17 a.m., and I almost didn't answer it. I mean, no good news has ever started with a hospital number at 2 in the morning. I stared at the screen in the dark. My heart was already thumping like it knew something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. I answered. A woman's voice said, "Hi, is this Michelle?" I said yes. She said, "Michelle, I'm calling from Moses Cone in Greensboro. You're listed as the secondary emergency contact for James Porter's partner, Katie. She's in active labor." I sat up so fast I got dizzy. I said, "What did you just say?" She repeated it slower, like maybe I hadn't heard her the first time. I said, "James Porter is my husband." There was a pause. Not confusion. Not surprise. Just the kind of pause where a professional person is choosing words that won't get them sued. Then she said, "Okay. Thank you for telling me. James is listed as the primary contact. We've been trying him for over an hour. He's not answering, and Katie asked us to contact him." I felt like somebody had poured ice water into my chest. I said, "I don't know a Katie." The nurse's voice softened. "I'm sorry. She's 19 minutes apart right now. We don't have a lot of time to sort out personal details. But she's here. She's having a baby. And your number is on the file." I stared at the wall, trying to make it make sense. James traveled for work. That was the whole story of our marriage, basically. James in the airport. James in hotel rooms. James on client sites. James on the road. James always about to board. James always losing service. But Greensboro was an hour away. An hour. Not Chicago. Not Dallas. Not some place I couldn't drive to on a whim. Greensboro. I said, "Why would my number be on her file?" The nurse hesitated. "It's listed under family. You're the secondary contact." Family. My stomach turned. I said, "Do not call me family. I'm his wife. And I'm not consenting to anything. I'm not responsible for anything. I didn't know any of this existed. Okay, she said quickly. "Okay, I understand. I'm documenting that. But I need to know. Are you coming in, or do you know how to reach him?" I looked down at my hand. I was gripping my phone so hard my fingers hurt. I said, "I'm calling him right now." "I'm so sorry," she said again, and I could tell she meant it. "Please call us back. We're just trying to make sure we can reach somebody if we have to." Then she gave me a callback number and hung up. I sat there in the dark, listening to the silence of my own bedroom like it was mocking me. James was supposed to be in Charlotte. That's what he said. Charlotte for 3 days. Remote meetings. Dinner with a client. Fly home Thursday morning. That was the schedule he had kissed me on the forehead about, like it was normal. Like it was boring. I called him, straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted. "James, answer me. Now." Nothing. I called again, and this time my hands were shaking so badly I hit the wrong button and ended the call. I took a breath. 1 breath. 2 breaths. Then I got out of bed. I didn't cry. Not yet. I went into the bathroom and turned on the light and looked at myself like I needed proof I existed. I'm not going to pretend I'm some tragic little wallflower. I'm not. I'm beautiful. I take care of myself. I've always taken care of myself. I'm the woman men look twice at in Target. I'm the woman other women clock and then decide whether they want to be friendly or icy. James used to look at me like I was a miracle. He still looked at me. He just didn't look at me with guilt. That should have been my first clue. I brushed my teeth like an idiot. Like clean breath was going to help me talk to my husband about his girlfriend in labor. Then I got dressed. Jeans, hoodie, sneakers, hair up, no makeup. Not because I was trying to prove anything. Because I didn't have time to paint my face for the circus I didn't buy tickets for. Before I left, I walked into the guest room and grabbed the folder we kept with our important paperwork. Mortgage, insurance, tax stuff. That boring adult pile that makes you feel safe because you think it means your life is real and stable. I didn't know yet what I was looking for. I just knew I wanted something in my hands that wasn't my own panic. Then I went back to my bedroom, looked at the other side of the bed where James hadn't slept in 3 nights, and I laughed. It came out sharp and ugly. Because I realized something in that moment that made my skin crawl. James didn't just cheat. He made me part of it. Somewhere, he wrote my name down. Somewhere, he typed my phone number into a form. Somewhere, he decided that when his other life got messy, the system would reach for me. I stood in my kitchen at 2:41 a.m. with my keys in my hand and I whispered, "Oh my God," not because he was having a baby, because he was confident enough to list me as the backup. That level of audacity is almost religious. And I don't say that lightly. I drove out of Raleigh with empty roads and a full-body rage I couldn't even shape into words yet. The whole way I kept calling him. Call. Voicemail. Call. Voicemail. Text. Nothing. It was like he evaporated. Like he wasn't a real person. Like he was a character who only existed when it was convenient. Halfway there, I pulled over at a gas station and sat in my car with the engine running because my hands were numb. I opened our banking app. Not because I had some mastermind plan. Because I needed something to focus on that wasn't the idea of another woman screaming my husband's name in a delivery room. I scrolled through transactions. At first, everything looked normal. Groceries, Home Depot, our electric bill, my Pilates studio, his gas, his usual coffee places. Then I saw a payment that made my throat close. A recurring transfer. Every month, same day, same amount. $950. Labeled rent. Rent? We owned our home. We didn't have rent. I scrolled back. There it was. Again. 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 It went back 11 months. I felt my face go hot. I clicked it. Account details. A routing number. An account I didn't recognize. I sat there in the glow of my phone like it was lighting me up for interrogation. I whispered, "You absolute..." I didn't even finish the sentence because words felt too small. I started the car again and kept driving. And somewhere around the time I passed the sign for Greensboro, my shock drained out and something colder replaced it. Clarity. It wasn't a dramatic movie moment where I suddenly became a warrior queen. It was quieter than that. It was the moment I stopped seeing James as my husband and started seeing him as a man who had decided I was a resource. A utility. A clean, stable platform he could build a second life on. That's what he thought I was. I pulled into the hospital parking deck at 3:52 a.m. The building looked the same as every hospital building. Bright lights, too clean, too calm, like it had no idea what it was about to do to me. Inside, the air smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. The front desk lady looked up and said, "Can I help you?" I said, "My name is Michelle. I got a call. I'm listed as an emergency contact for Katie." The woman's eyes flicked to a computer screen. Her face stayed neutral, but her tone went into that polite professional lane. "Yes, Katie Wallace, labor and delivery. Are you family?" I stared at her. I said, "I'm James Porter's wife." Her fingers paused on the keyboard. She blinked once, like her brain had to reboot. Then she said softer, "Okay. James Porter is listed as the primary contact. You're listed as secondary. Relationship says, cousin." Cost. My mouth actually fell open. I said cousin. She looked at me like she didn't want to look at me too hard, because she could already tell this wasn't a normal family moment. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That's what the file says." I leaned forward slightly and kept my voice low, not because I was being nice, but because if I raised it, I might start screaming and not stop. I said he put me down as his cousin. She swallowed. "Do you want me to contact the charge nurse?" I said no. "I want you to remove my name. Right now, off everything. I'm not a contact. I'm not family. I'm not anything to this situation." She nodded quickly. "Okay. I can note that, but I can't remove it without him," I finished for her. She didn't deny it. I took a breath through my nose. Slow. Controlled. I said, "Where is he?" She hesitated. "We don't share patient information." I let out a humorless laugh. I said, "That's funny. Because he shares mine." She looked down. "Ma'am, don't call me ma'am," I said. Not loud, just sharp. Then I heard a voice behind me. A man's voice. Familiar. Too familiar. "I didn't think you'd come." I turned. James stood there in a dark hoodie and jeans, like he was just some guy who got pulled out of bed for an emergency. His hair was messy. His face looked tired. And he didn't look ashamed. He looked annoyed, like I had disrupted his schedule. I stared at him and my body went so still I felt like glass. I said, "You put me down as your cousin." He blinked. "Michelle?" "No," I said. "Answer the question." His jaw tightened. He glanced at the desk lady, then back at me. He lowered his voice like we were negotiating something. He said, "This isn't the place." I smiled. It was not a nice smile. I said, "You are standing in a hospital in Greensboro at 4 in the morning while your girlfriend is in labor, and you're telling me this isn't the place." He flinched at the word girlfriend. He said, "She's not." I cut him off. "What is she, James?" "A hobby." His eyes darted away. "That's what men do when they know they're wrong and they still want to be right." He said, "I didn't want you dragged into this." I laughed again. I said, "Dragged. James, I got a phone call. I didn't wander in here for a tour." He exhaled through his nose like I was being dramatic. And that right there, that tiny little exhale, it lit a fire in me that I will never forget. I leaned in and said, "Tell me the truth, right now, or I swear to God I will make a scene that follows you for the rest of your life." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said very flat, "She's having a baby." I stared. I said, "No kidding." He said, "It happened, it happened," I repeated, tasting the words like they were rancid. I said, "You do know pregnancy doesn't happen the way a flat tire happens. You don't just wake up and go, 'Wow, look what happened.'" His lips pressed into a thin line. I said, "How long?" He hesitated. I said, "How long, James?" 11 months, he said. 11 months. The rent payments. I felt my stomach drop. I said, "You've been living here." He didn't answer. I took a slow breath. I said, "You told me Charlotte. You told me Chicago. You told me Dallas. You told me your job was travel. You told me." He raised his hands slightly. "My job is travel." I stared at him. I said, "An hour away is not travel. That's a commute." He looked irritated again. And then, like he couldn't help himself, he said it. He said, "Do you know how many men would kill to have what I had?" I blinked. He kept going, like the words were delicious in his mouth. He said, "A good job, a solid life, 2 places, 2 women. That's—" He smiled. A small, smug smile. "A man's dream," he said. I stared at him like I had never seen him before. Because I hadn't. This wasn't my husband. This was a man who believed his life was a reward for being clever. I said, "You're disgusting." He scoffed quietly. "Don't do that." "Don't do what?" I said. "Maim what you are." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. He said, "You didn't want kids." My whole body went cold. I said, "Excuse me." He said, "You were never sure." I was fine with it. I compromised. I stayed. I didn't pressure you. I stared at him, stunned by the audacity. I said, "You compromised by getting another woman pregnant." He shrugged slightly. He said, "It wasn't intended, but I do want children, and now, here we are." Here we are. Like we were standing in line at Costco. I said, "You told me you were fine." He said, "I was fine, until I wasn't." I looked at him and I felt something snap in my chest. Not heartbreak, something harder. I said, "So you used me." His eyes narrowed. "That's not fair." I laughed again. I said, "You put me down as your cousin James. You listed me as backup emergency contact for your girlfriend's birth. You withdrew rent out of our account to pay for your second life, and you're telling me what's fair." His face tightened. He said, "I didn't want you to find out like this." I said, "How did you want me to find out?" Christmas morning. A family photo. He flinched. I could hear the beep of hospital equipment somewhere. The squeak of nurses' shoes. A baby crying in some distant hallway. Real life continued, while mine got bulldozed. I leaned in. I said, "What did you tell her I am?" His eyes flicked. I said, "Tell me." He sighed, like I was exhausting. He said, "I told her you were my cousin." I stared. I said, "Why?" He said, "Because you're you." "What does that mean?" I snapped. He said, "You're stable. You're responsible. If something went wrong and I couldn't be reached, I needed someone. I needed coverage. Coverage. Like I was an insurance policy." I said, "So I'm your backup plan." He didn't deny it. I looked at him and I felt my throat tighten. I said, "Do you even hear yourself?" He said, "Michelle, I'm trying to manage this." I nodded slowly. I said, "No, you're trying to manage me." His eyes hardened. He said, "This is not the time." I said, you keep saying that like time is on your side, like you can just stall until I calm down. He opened his mouth. I held up a hand. I said, I want you to understand something. I am not going to scream. I am not going to beg. I am not going to bargain. I am not going to work through it. His jaw flexed. I said, I'm going to leave this hospital. And when I do, your life is going to start collapsing in ways you can't talk your way out of. He scoffed. Michelle? I turned slightly to the desk lady. I said, I want a copy of whatever shows my name on that file. She hesitated. I don't care, I said, calm as ice. Then I want the name of the patient advocate. I want the charge nurse. I want documentation that I told you this was fraudulent. Because I did not consent to being listed as anything. James's face changed. For the first time, I saw a crack. He said, don't do this here. I looked at him. I said, you did this here. He stepped closer and hissed, Katie's in labor. I stared at him. I said, then go be there. His eyes widened slightly, like he expected me to soften. I didn't. I said, you want a baby. Congratulations. You got one. Go deal with the consequences without using me as a sponge. He grabbed my arm. Not hard. Not violent. Possessive. Reflexive. Like I was his. I yanked my arm back and my voice dropped to a whisper. I said, do not touch me. His face tightened. He leaned in and said, if you blow this up, you're going to destroy people. I stared at him. I said people, plural. He didn't answer. And that told me everything. I walked out of the lobby and into the cold night air like my body needed oxygen. I stood there under a streetlight and called my best friend Tasha. She answered on the second ring. Michelle, she mumbled. What's wrong? I said, James is having a baby with another woman. Silence. Then, what? I said, the hospital called me. I'm at Moses Cone in Greensboro. He listed me as emergency contact. He told her I'm his cousin. Tasha sucked in a breath so sharp I could hear it. Oh my God, she said. I stared up at the dark sky. I said, I'm not okay. No, she said firmly. No, you're not. Listen to me. Do not drive home like this. Sit in your car. Lock the doors. Breathe. I'm coming. You're in Raleigh, I said. I don't care, she said. I'm coming. I swallowed. I said, I'm going home. Michelle, she said, voice sharp. Don't do something stupid. I laughed once. I said, I'm not going to do something stupid. I'm going to do something smart. I hung up. I sat in my car in the parking deck for a few minutes with my hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to waste a single second on performing pain for a man who treated my life like a convenience. I opened my phone and changed the password on our bank account. Then I changed the password on our credit card portal. Then I froze the joint card. Then I opened our home security app and changed the login. James always handled the paperwork. Now I was handling the locks. I drove back to Raleigh with my jaw clenched so tight my teeth hurt. When I got home, it was just before 6. The sky was barely lightening. I walked inside and the house smelled like us. Like our detergent. Like our candles. Like the life I thought I had. I stood in the foyer and let myself feel it for 2 seconds. Then I moved. I went to the closet and pulled out the suitcases. I grabbed every item of his clothing that I could reach without thinking. Shirts. Pants. Socks. Shoes. Belts. That stupid watch he loved. I didn't throw anything. I didn't destroy anything. I just removed him. I stacked his suitcases by the front door like he was a guest who overstayed. Then I went into the office and pulled open the file cabinet where we kept our important documents. I found our marriage certificate. I stared at it. Then I took a picture. Not because I needed proof. Because I wanted the universe to understand that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a man deciding our marriage was optional. I sat at my desk and called a divorce attorney at 8:30 a.m. on the dot. I didn't cry on the phone. I didn't ramble. I said, my husband has a pregnant girlfriend. I have evidence of marital funds being used. I need to protect myself. What do I do today? The attorney paused, then said, okay. Take a breath. We can handle this. Hearing a calm voice say we can handle this felt like someone putting a blanket over my shoulders. I spent the next few hours doing exactly what she told me. I opened a new account in my name only. I moved my paycheck direct deposit. I documented the rent transfers. I documented the hospital call time. I documented his texts, or the lack of them. Then at 11:14 a.m., James finally called me. His voice sounded hoarse, like he'd been up all night, like he'd been through something big, like he wanted credit for it. "Michelle," he said quietly. I didn't answer. He said, "She had the baby." I stared at my laptop screen. I said, "Do you want a cookie?" He exhaled sharply. Don't what?" I said. "Don't speak like you're a victim." He said, "I'm coming home." I said, "No, you're not." Silence. Then, "Michelle." I said, "Your stuff is by the door. Don't come here." He said, "We need to talk." I said, "We talked. In the hospital. When you told me you were living a man's dream." He went quiet. Then he said, "I didn't mean it like that." I laughed. I said, "You meant it exactly like that. You said it like you were bragging to yourself." He said, "You're twisting it." I said, "No, I'm finally hearing you without the marriage filter." He tried another angle. He said, "You're going to regret doing this so fast." I blinked. I said, "Doing what fast?" "Protecting myself." He said, "Throwing everything away." I leaned back in my chair. I said, "James, you threw it away a year ago. I'm just taking the trash out." He got quiet again. Then he said, "Katie doesn't know." I felt my stomach tighten. I said, "Know what?" He said, "That you're my wife." There it was, the nerve. He said it like it was my responsibility to keep his lie intact. I said, "Oh." He rushed. "I need you to not contact her." I stared at the wall. I said, "You need me." He said, "Michelle?" I said, "Let me tell you something. You don't get to need me anymore. Not after you used me as your backup contact for your baby." He said, "It wasn't like that." I said, "Stop saying that. It was exactly like that." He tried to soften his voice. He said, "She's postpartum. She's emotional. If you reach out, you're going to hurt her." I laughed. I said, "You mean the woman you got pregnant while you were married to me?" "Michelle," he snapped. And that was the first time I heard the real anger. Not at himself. At me. For not cooperating. I said, "There he is." What he said. I said, "The part of you that's mad because I'm not making this easy. You didn't just cheat. You wanted to cheat comfortably. You wanted to cheat with customer service." He said, "This isn't a joke." I said, "It's not. It's a humiliation." He went quiet. Then, softly, "I'm coming over." I said, "If you step onto my property, I'll call the police." He scoffed. "Michelle, don't be insane." I said, "James, do you know what's insane? Listing your wife as your cousin so your girlfriend can have your baby without knowing you're married." Silence. Then he said, "I loved you." I blinked. I said, "Loved. Past tense. How convenient." He said, "I still do." I said, "No. You love the life I provided you. You love having a stable home base and a soft place to land between hotel rooms and lies. You love that I made adulthood look easy for you." He whispered, "That's not fair." I smiled. I said, "I don't care about fair. I care about done." I hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. Then I did something I didn't plan to do. I opened my phone and I searched Katie's name. Katie Wallace. Greensboro. It took 5 minutes. She wasn't hiding. Beautiful like me. That's the part that almost made me laugh too. Not because it was funny. Because it was so predictable. Men like James don't cheat down. They cheat sideways. They cheat into a mirror. They cheat into a life that makes them feel like a god. Her social media had posts from months ago. Dinner plates. New nails. A picture of a man's hand holding hers, the watch I recognized on his wrist. A photo in front of a rental townhouse, captioned, "New Chapter." I stared at it until my vision blurred. Then I scrolled to a photo from 6 months ago. A baby ultrasound. Caption, "He's perfect already." He'd wanted a boy. He'd never said it out loud to me. But I'd felt it. The way men like him talk about legacy. The way they talk about carrying the name without realizing women have been carrying everything else. I didn't message her. Not yet. I wasn't going to walk into James's mess swinging emotionally and give him exactly what he could label as crazy. I was going to do it the way that hurts him most. Clean. Documented. Unavoidable. That afternoon, I met with my attorney. She looked over the rent transfers and nodded slowly. She said, "We can use this." I said, "Good. She said, "Do you feel safe?" I paused. Then I said, "I feel furious." She nodded. "Geary is fine. Safety matters more. Change your locks. Today." I did. I changed the locks. I changed the codes. I added cameras. Then I called his mother. I didn't want to. But I did. Because one of the things men like James rely on is silence. They rely on women protecting the family image, even when the family image is strangling them. His mother answered with her sweet voice. "Michelle," she said. "Honey, how are you?" I took a breath. I said, "James has a baby with another woman." Silence. Then, "Excuse me." I said, "A woman in Greensboro. She gave birth last night. The hospital called me because he listed me as emergency contact." Silence. Then, very quietly, "Oh." My stomach dropped. I said, "You knew." She said, "It's complicated." I laughed. I said, "No, it's not complicated. It's cheating. It's lying. It's stealing. It's humiliating." She said, "Michelle, please." I said, "How long did you know?" She hesitated. I said, "How long?" She whispered, "A few months." My hands clenched. I said, "And you said nothing?" She said, "James said he was handling it." I stared at the wall. I said, "Handling it. Like I'm a problem to manage." She said, "I didn't want to get involved." I said, "You got involved the minute you protected him instead of telling me the truth." Her voice sharpened. "Michelle, don't talk to me like that." I smiled. I said, "Like what?" "Like you're the kind of woman who raises a son and then acts surprised when he thinks women are disposable." She gasped. I said, "I'm done. Do not call me. Do not come to my house. And if James tries to bring that baby into my life like some Hallmark ending, I will scorch the earth." Then I hung up. I sat there shaking, and for the first time since the call, I cried. Not because I missed him. Because I realized I had been alone in my marriage for a long time, and I didn't even know it. That night, James showed up anyway. Of course he did. Men like him always think they can talk their way back into the building. My doorbell camera alert went off. I opened the app and saw him standing there with his hands in his pockets like he was waiting for room service. I didn't open the door. I spoke through the camera. I said, "Leave." He looked up at the camera. "Michelle," he said, voice thick. "We need to talk." I said, "No, we don't." He said, "I'm not leaving until you open the door." I said, "Then you'll be standing there when the police arrive." He scoffed. "You're really doing this?" I said, "Yes, I'm really doing this." He stared into the camera like he couldn't believe his own script wasn't working. Then he tried a different one. He said, "You're acting like I never loved you." I almost laughed. I said, "James, you lied so hard you made me your cousin." He flinched. I said, "You don't get to come to my door and speak love when you treated me like paperwork." He snapped, "I didn't plan the baby." I said, "But you planned the rent payments." He opened his mouth. I said, "You planned the schedule. You planned the lies. You planned the second home. You planned the version of you that got to feel like a king." His face tightened. I said, "And now that it's messy, you want me to help you clean it." He whispered, "I don't want to lose you." I stared at him through a screen and felt nothing soft. I said, "You already did." He stood there for a long time. Then he said, "Katie thinks you're my cousin." I stared. I said, "I know." He swallowed. He said, "I need to tell her." I laughed. I said, "You should have told me a year ago." He said, "Michelle, please." I said, "No." And then, because I wanted to leave a scar, I added, "You don't get to make me the villain in your story. You made yourself the villain. Now go live in it." Then I turned off the mic and watched him stand there with his mouth slightly open like the world finally told him no. He left. The next morning, I woke up to a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "Hi. This is Katie." My stomach tightened. Another message came right after. "James said you might try to contact me. He said you're his cousin, but he won't tell me why the hospital called you his wife." My hands went cold. So he didn't tell her. He let the hospital do it. Coward. I stared at her message for a long time. Then I replied. I kept it simple. Not emotional. Not cruel. Just truth. I said, "Katie, I'm not his cousin. I'm his wife. We've been married for 12 years. I found out about you when the hospital called me during your labor. I'm sorry you're learning it this way. I didn't know you existed." There was a long pause. then 3 dots, then nothing. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. I didn't answer. She texted again. Is this real? I replied yes. Then I sent her one photo. James and me. From last Christmas. Matching pajamas. His arm around me. Our tree in the background. The life he never stopped living while he built another one. A few minutes later, she replied with one word. That word had so much in it. Shock. Rage. Shame. The way your body goes numb when the floor drops out. Then she wrote, he told me you were his cousin because his ex was crazy and stalked him. I stared. Of course. He didn't just lie. He smeared me. He made me a threat in her mind before she ever met me. He planted the story so she'd obey. I took a breath and replied, I'm not crazy. I'm just done. Then I put my phone down and walked outside into the morning air like I needed to remind myself the world still existed. And listen. If you've ever been betrayed in a way that made you feel stupid for trusting someone, I want you to pause right here and do 2 things. Hit like, subscribe. Because I'm not going to whisper through this story like I'm ashamed. And second, leave a comment and tell me if you've ever had someone lie on your name to protect themselves. Or tell me where you're watching from. I'm serious. I want to see how many of us are out here realizing we were married to a stranger. I went back inside and kept moving. Because pain is real, but paperwork is louder. Over the next week, I watched James try to hold both lives together like a man trying to keep 2 doors closed with one body. He called. He texted. He begged. He threatened. He tried charm. Michelle, we can fix this. He tried guilt. You're going to destroy a baby's life. He tried anger. You're doing this just to punish me. And every time, I responded the same way. Short. No. He was used to me being reasonable. So he thought if he said reasonable words, I would come back into position. But I wasn't his position anymore. Katie messaged me twice more. Not with insults. With questions. And I answered what I could without making myself her therapist, because I wasn't going to become the emotional support wife for the girlfriend he got pregnant. Absolutely not. She asked, did he ever talk about me? I said no. She asked, did you know he wanted kids? I stared at that one for a long time. Then I wrote, he said he was fine either way. He told me he was happy with our life. That's what made this so brutal. She replied, he told me you didn't want kids, so he had to find someone who would give him a family. I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, because it was so typical. Men like James always rewrite women into obstacles. They don't betray you because they're selfish. They betray you because they need you to be the reason they're allowed to be selfish. I replied, he doesn't get to make me the villain to justify his choices. She didn't respond. And I could feel the truth landing in her like a bruise. James tried to show up again. This time he brought his sister. Because of course he did. A woman always shows up to do the emotional labor when a man's mess gets too heavy. They stood on my porch like it was a negotiation. His sister Lauren spoke first. Michelle, she said, voice tight. Can we please talk? I stared through the camera and said. James leaned toward the door like I could feel his presence through wood. Michelle, you're being cruel. I laughed. I said, cruel is calling your wife your cousin. Lauren flinched. Then she said, we're just trying to find a way forward. I said, there is no forward. There is divorce. James snapped, you're acting like I murdered someone. I stared at the camera. I said, you murdered the marriage. Lauren's voice went softer. Michelle, please. The baby is here. James is scared. Katie's scared. Everyone's hurting. I said, everyone. Lauren swallowed. I said, let me guess. You knew. Lauren's face changed. Not denial. Not shock. Guilt. I smiled. I said, you knew. Lauren whispered, I didn't want to be the one to tell you. I said, so you let me be the one to find out from a nurse at 2 a.m. James said, Lauren, stop. I leaned closer to the camera. I said, get off my porch, both of you. Lauren tried one last time. Michelle, you're going to regret doing this in anger. I laughed. I said, I'm not angry. I'm awake. Then I watched them leave. And I felt something strange. Relief. Because every time someone chose him, it made it easier for me to choose myself. 2 weeks later, my attorney filed. James was served at the Greensboro townhouse. Yes, I found the townhouse. Remember those rent transfers? I tracked them. I found the property management company. I found the address. He paid for his second life with our money and thought he was slick. He wasn't slick. He was lazy. Because he assumed I'd never look. He assumed I'd stay in the role of trusting wife forever. My attorney also filed a motion for temporary financial orders. Because if he wanted to play house in two places, he could pay for it with his own money. Not mine. James called me the day he was served. His voice was shaking with anger this time. How could you serve me there? He snapped. Katie saw it. I smiled. I said, good. He hissed, you're doing this to humiliate me. I leaned back in my chair and said, no, you did this to humiliate me. I'm just not hiding it for you. He said, you're going to ruin everything. I said, James, you already ruined everything. I'm just canceling the subscription. He breathed hard. Then he said, I can still fix this. I laughed. I said, with what? Another lie. He went quiet. Then he said, you're being heartless. I replied, no. I'm being accurate. I hung up. Over the next month, the story spread. Not because I ran around screaming it. Because secrets don't stay secret when they're built on convenience. James's mother tried to call me again. I didn't answer. Lauren sent a long text about family and forgiveness. I deleted it. A mutual friend messaged me, is it true? I replied, yes, that was it. I didn't write a novel. I didn't do a Facebook post with crying emojis and vague quotes about betrayal. I let the truth sit there like a clean blade. Because the truth doesn't need decoration. Katie messaged me again one night. She said, he's saying you're trying to take everything from him. I laughed. I typed back, I'm not taking anything. I'm keeping what's mine. She replied, he says you never supported him. That one hit because it was such a lie it was almost art. I replied, I supported him so much I unknowingly funded your townhouse. Then I sent her a screenshot of the rent transfers. She didn't respond for a long time. Then she wrote, he told me he paid it. I wrote, he didn't. Then I put my phone down. Because at that point, the truth was doing the work. By month 3, James started spiraling. The townhouse became too expensive without our joint money. Katie, understandably, didn't want to play secret family anymore. His mother was furious because her church friends were whispering. And James, the man who called it a man's dream, suddenly discovered that dreams feel different when you have to pay for them with your own skin. He showed up at my door one last time. Not to beg, to rage. He stood on my porch and yelled, you're ruining my life. I opened the door just enough to look at him. I didn't invite him in. I said, you ruined your life. I'm just not cushioning the fall. He pointed at me like I was the problem. This baby didn't ask for any of this. I nodded. I know. His face twisted. So how can you be so cold? I stared at him. I said, cold as listing your wife as your cousin. Cold as using her phone number as an emergency backup for your girlfriend's labor. Cold as smiling when you call it a man's dream. He opened his mouth. I said, I don't want another speech. He scoffed. You loved me. I said I loved who I thought you were. He said, I can be better. I laughed softly. I said, better for who? For your next wife. That landed. I could see it land. He looked at me like he wanted to hate me, but he couldn't find a clean way to. And then, because he's James, he tried one last manipulation. He said, if you had just agreed to have kids, none of this would have happened. I stared at him for a long second. Then I said, so you admit it. You punished me. His face went blank. I said, you didn't just cheat because you could. You cheated because you wanted to win. You wanted a life where you never had to compromise. Where you got to be in heaven, like you told me. 2 houses, 2 women, and nobody ever telling you no. His jaw flexed. I said, well, here's no. I closed the door. I leaned against it for a moment, shaking. Not because I missed him. Because I felt the weight of what I survived. And because I knew in that moment that I was never going to be the same. I was going to be better. Not softer. Not sweeter. Better. Around the 5th month, something happened that felt like karma had a calendar. James's job changed policies. Less travel. More in office. More accountability. He couldn't keep the illusion alive anymore. And the thing about a man who builds his whole identity on being wanted in 2 places is that when one place stops wanting him, he panics. Katie didn't want to be second anymore. She didn't want to be a secret anymore. And she definitely didn't want to be a woman with a baby tied to a man whose wife just proved, in court, that he'd been siphoning money. I didn't celebrate her pain. I didn't gloat. I just watched the consequences do what consequences do. James tried to settle. He offered me terms like he was being generous. I rejected them. Not because I wanted to take him for everything, because I wanted the truth recorded. I wanted it documented that he used marital funds. I wanted it documented that he misrepresented our relationship. I wanted it documented that he created this mess and then tried to make me clean it. I wanted the official record to say, in black and white, that he was not the hero of this story. And somewhere around month 7, the judge granted temporary orders that forced him to pay me back a portion of what he diverted. Not everything, but enough. Enough to sting. Enough to teach him that life isn't a man's dream when the bill comes due. That night, I sat on my couch with a glass of wine and stared at the message from my attorney. I felt something I didn't expect. Peace. Not joy. Not triumph. Peace. Because the world had finally matched reality. And if you're still here listening to me, I want you to do something. Leave a comment and tell me this. Do you think a cheater like James actually believes his own lies? Or do you think he knows exactly what he's doing and just doesn't care? I want to see what you think. And if you haven't liked and subscribed yet, do it now. Because stories like this aren't rare. They're just usually hidden. A year after the hospital call, my divorce was finalized. James tried to show up at the final hearing looking put together. New haircut. New blazer. The image of a man who tells himself he's still the prize. Katie wasn't there. And that told me everything. He sat across from me and didn't look at me. Not once. Because the truth is, men like James don't like to look at the women they failed to erase. It reminds them that we're real. After it was done, he followed me out to the hallway. "Michelle," he said quietly. I kept walking. He caught up. "I never meant to hurt you." I stopped and turned. I looked him straight in the face. I said, "James, you meant to benefit. You just didn't care who got hurt." His throat bobbed. He said, "I think about you." I nodded. I said, "Good." He frowned. "Good." I said, "Yes, good. Because I want you to think about me every time you tell yourself you're a good man. I want you to remember the hospital call. I want you to remember the cousin lie. I want you to remember the rent payments. I want you to remember that you had a wife who loved you. And you traded her for a man's dream like you were shopping for a new life." His face tightened. I said, "And I want you to remember the part you hate most." He swallowed. "What?" I smiled. I said, "I'm fine." He stared at me. And I could see it. That was the part he couldn't stand. Not that I hated him. Not that I was angry. That I was okay. That I walked out of his story and didn't collapse. Because men like him don't fear women who cry. They fear women who stop caring. I turned and walked away. And I didn't look back. My name is Michelle, and this is what happened when I was pushed beyond restraint. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this story.